If you like what I do, consider joining my channel or donating to my coffee. Links in the description. Holy shit! Did I just kill that with my flying surfboard? That was the coolest shit I have ever seen! I won't bury the lead. DragonLoop is a great Metroidvania that does a lot of remarkable things and adds so much to the Metroidvania genre. I beat it a little over a month ago and wanted to get a video out to y'all immediately, but instead, I waited. I waited because despite how incredible the game was, it also came with a lot of jank that would have forced me to review it poorly, and I didn't want to do that to a game that had so much potential. This game was developed by a two-person team who, judging by all the patch notes, is working really hard to make DragonLoop the best possible game it can be. So I made the judgment call to just sit back and let them cook. I rebooted the game a month later, and boys, let me tell you, this team has made some great improvements. I'll highlight them as we go, just in case anyone who bounced off for a specific reason wanted to see a comparison and decide if they wanted to jump back in. With that preamble out of the way, what is DragonLoop about? You play as C, an amnesiac trapped in a 5-day time loop where her decisions reshape the world with each cycle. Alongside your spectral friend Oro, explore branching timelines and uncover lost memories to discover your past and your connection to the dragon. I've already kind of spoiled things by saying DragonLoop's great, but how great can it actually be?
Combat.
DragonLoop's combat comes with a lot of options and interesting mechanics, but the bulk of what you'll be doing is smacking monsters with the sacred flame that bursts from your magical bracelet. The flame acts much like a sword, but it doesn't come with any combos or advanced techniques like parrying, so don't expect anything too technical. Combat mostly boils down to swipe and retreat tactics, but DragonLoop keeps it spicy with some clever systems. For instance, the meter in the bottom left corner. It fills up as you attack, and when it's full with the letter X, C goes into super mode where she hits a little harder and moves a lot faster. It incentivizes aggressive play, which I always appreciate. C also has this meter in the top left corner for her OP, which I think stands for Oro Power, named after your trusty floating sidekick. This meter's interesting as it dictates whether or not your special attacks do damage. As long as you have a tick of OP, your specials land with full force. Run out, and you can still perform them, they'll just be red and do 0 damage. At first glance it seems odd, but it's actually a smart system because most of C's special moves double as traversal tools. Personally, I'll gladly lose some damage output if it means I don't have to grind OP just to wall jump my way to the next platform. You can refill OP by smacking enemies around, which is intuitive and snappy. But when the room's empty, it's comforting to know I can still grab onto something with Oro's magical arm, even if I'm completely drained. Speaking of being drained, let's talk healing. Much like a Dark Souls Estus flask, C carries seeds that act as her reusable healing item. You start with one charge, and it refills at time corridors and lampstands scattered throughout the world. You can eventually upgrade how much it heals and how many charges it holds, but even maxed out, it remains a limited resource. What makes it special is how it works. C plants a seed, a lily blooms, and its healing nectar homes in on her no matter where she is on screen. And that's important, because as you'd imagine, waiting for a flower to grow takes time. But C doesn't have to sit there twiddling her thumbs. She's free to move, dodge, and attack while she waits for the lily to bloom. With a little foresight, you can plant a seed, charge into a fight, take a hit, and get healed mid-air before you even land. It's a smart little mechanic that opens up the door to some cool strategies. And combat options go on and on with all of C's specials, but I'm going to save discussing them for the next section. Just know you have a lot of ways to do damage, and if you're anything like me, you'll mostly stick to your basic attack, though I did use C's arrow move that also lets her wall jump. When it comes to bosses, I found them to be pretty dang difficult for a couple of reasons. In the early game, I just couldn't get the hang of C's dodge. She gets a dashing maneuver that feels like it should be her dodge, but it has 0 iframes, making dashing headlong through enemy attacks result in a concussion. C's real dodge comes in Oro's magical arm. Grabbing an enemy as they attack makes C temporarily invincible as long as you don't attack. Attacking after a grab makes C do a powerful follow-up at the cost of losing your invincibility, so use it wisely. After getting over the learning curve and mastering the grab to avoid damage, the next dumb thing I did was don the Ichor Wreath. Ichor is a type of currency, but I'll get into all that in the progression section. For now, let's focus on the Ichor Wreath for its combat implications. Equipping the crown makes you an Ichor magnet, meaning all Ichor dropped from enemies will draw to you automatically. However, this comes with a huge drawback. Wearing the crown increases entropy. What's entropy? No clue. All I know is that the more entropy the world has, the more damage enemies do to you. But I didn't know the crown increased entropy because of one of the game's biggest issues at launch. The text to convey this information was in Chinese. And guess what language I can't read? That's right. Much of the game's text had not been translated to English. Certain item descriptions, biome names, random dialogue, an entire ending. I beat the game with a bad ending and was met with a wall of Chinese characters. It was frustrating and one of the major reasons I sat on this review. Thankfully, upon replaying it a month later, many of the texts have been translated to English. Thus, how I finally got to see what the Ichor Wreath's drawback was. I had no idea that thing made bosses harder. I took it off immediately and retried a lot of the bosses again, and sure enough, their damage was much more manageable. The bosses themselves are actually pretty cool. There's like 30 bosses or something like that. I liked their designs, and they're all fun enough to fight. Many I'd categorize as mini bosses, and they weren't too tough. Mini bosses would typically be hiding away somewhere, and defeating them rewarded you with an elf. A version of that mini boss you could summon to help you in battle by expending SP. Elves did all kinds of things. They could shoot projectiles, rush out and attack, or hang around and fight for as long as you have SP, which is this bar here. SP regenerates over time, so I was always summoning these guys for help. As for the game's main bosses, I found them to be much more challenging, fast-paced, and rewarding. There were actually a few I found so challenging that I swore I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But nope, I just sucked and needed to get good. The difficulty curve ramps down a little past the mid-game, but I found some of the early game bosses to be pretty tough. I guess what I'm saying is, if you're finding the bosses to be too much, hang in there. They eventually either got easier or I just got better. That's it for combat. DragonLoop serves up a buffet of mechanics, meters, and summonable mini-boss buddies. But at the end of the day, you'll mostly be flame-throwing fools with your magic bracelet. And thankfully, it feels great every time. The OP and entropy systems add some unique flavor, even if the latter wasn't something I was privy to in my initial playthrough due to the Chinese text. And while the lack of English text at launch was a major buzzkill, the recent updates smooth things out. With about 30 bosses, a ton of summons, and a neat dodging mechanic, DragonLoop's combat is surprisingly fun.
Abilities. Platforming.
The abilities you unlock in DragonLoop are incredible, with many of them being uncommon and unique to the genre. First off, C starts with Oro's magical arm that lets her grab enemies and special orbs in the environment. I love when an MV begins with some kind of hook to capture players' attention, and this magical arm is a pretty good one. Grabbing anything with the arm acts as a dodge and a double jump, and the arm can grab things through walls, which then pulls C through as if she were a ghost. So, out the gate, players can pull off some pretty nifty moves. As the game progresses, you'll unlock even cooler stuff. Yeah, you get the basic air dash and double jump, but you also get a pufferfish that does different things based on the situation, a mechanical spider that fires drones, and a freaking flying surfboard. And that's not even everything. I just don't want to spoil all the cool moves C gets. She gets a lot of neat things to play around with, and thankfully, the world she's in is designed to let C have fun with all her cool abilities. The platforming in DragonLoop is pretty solid, thanks in part to just how quick and responsive C is. The level design is fine, and each biome has its gimmicks and quirks. But what really makes platforming fun is just how hard you can sequence break. There were so many times where I thought there was no way I could get across somewhere or reach a certain ledge, but with creative use of some of these abilities and some determination, I was able to get to places long before I should have. And pulling off these ridiculous maneuvers felt so good. There was this one part where I used the air dash, wall jump, and pufferfish to get across this narrow corridor above a river, which was challenging because touching water with C resets her onto the last solid ground she touched. Finagling my way through this part was 100% unnecessary, as you can actually find the ability to freaking swim, but it was way more satisfying to do it this way, and it let me get some things I shouldn't have been able to get so soon. And the game is full of moments like this where creativity and genuine platforming skills will reward you, so keep your eyes peeled for those sequence breaks. You'll be surprised at what you can actually accomplish. As far as puzzles go, there's a huge puzzle you have to solve that involves navigating the entire map and its time corridors, but I'm saving that for the exploration section. I'll also be discussing the game's main hook, its time loop mechanic, then as well. That said, the puzzles in DragonLoop mostly revolve around the time loop mechanic, unlocking shortcuts, and finding things called patterns that are used to open gates. So, essentially keys that open doors. Though navigating the time loop and its branching paths is brilliant, I'd say the game's other puzzles are pretty basic, and that's fine, because trying to figure out the paths in the time loop in order to progress is enough to put on your plate. Believe me. That's it for this section. DragonLoop's world eventually feels like a playground once C starts unlocking her full moveset. With her slick speed, responsive controls, and the game's willingness to reward creative parkour, DragonLoop nails that iconic Metroidvania moment when you stop crawling and start soaring, tearing through areas that once gave you grief. And thank goodness it does, because with a time loop structure that demands plenty of backtracking, and more than just a few "where the heck do I go now" headaches, those fast, fluid traversal options keep the repetition from wearing you down. When the world gets confusing, at least moving through it never stops being fun.
Progression.
DragonLoop doesn't do the usual XP grind or loot chase. Nope. Instead, C powers up by collecting beads for her magical bracelet. But here's the thing, beads by themselves do nothing. They're just shiny trinkets. Until you visit a special NPC found in time corridors, these eerie blue rooms scattered throughout the world. The NPC lets you craft knots, and each knot provides a unique buff. +1 HP, +1 attack, that kind of thing. And you can craft up to 5 of each knot if you've got the bead bank to back it up. And if you ever change your mind, just respect. You can break down your knots and redistribute your beads however you like, whenever you want, at no cost. What's even cooler is, I don't think there's a hard cap to how many beads you can find. They're tucked all over the place in the map, they restock in shops thanks to timey-wimey nonsense, and sometimes you can get them to pop out randomly by watering a special plant in the Soul Realm. I'll get to the Soul Realm here in a moment. I want to finish up the time corridor first. There's a dude in the time corridor that sells cakes that give you a barrier or something, but I never used this feature because when I played the game originally, all this text was in Chinese, so I skipped it. It's in English now, just to be clear. What I didn't skip was the antiques you can set up in the time corridor. Long story short, these are your Hollow Knight charms or Rabby Ribby badges, modifiers that help C in many different ways. Though setting them up is a little more convoluted when compared to similar systems. In DragonLoop, you have to find the antique, go to a specific NPC in the Soul Realm to awaken it, then go to a time corridor to equip it. It's weird, but it's fine. Anyway, you can equip up to 6 antiques at a time, and they do stuff like increase your HP, attack, SP, how many times you can heal, and they can do other things like allow you to see your enemy's HP. I'd rather have that be a standard feature of the game, but it is what it is. That's it for the time corridor, at least when it comes to progression. They're way more important in the grand scheme of the game, but we'll get back to them. Let's finally take a peek at the Soul Realm. To get to the Soul Realm, you either let all 5 days pass to proc the apocalypse, or you can talk to the NPC who makes your knots and have them send you there. In the Soul Realm, you have the aforementioned NPC who awakens your antiques, the plant you can water that rewards you with a bevy of random things, and this cat who levels up your bracelet once you find jade threads, which I stumbled upon accidentally because the jade thread description was in Chinese when I first played DragonLoop. Currently, it is in English. Upgrading your bracelet unlocks advanced knots that pack even stronger buffs, so it was a good thing I discovered this, or else I would have been grossly underleveled. And being grossly underleveled with the Ichor wreath on my head would have only ended with disaster. The final NPC in the Soul Realm is used to level up your elves. If you recall, an elf is a mini-boss you defeated who has become a summonable ally. You can enhance them to level 4, with the 4th level drastically improving their skill and changing how they look. To increase their levels, you'll need a currency called Ichor, which is dropped from defeated enemies. The other currency the game uses is called Soul, also dropped by defeated enemies. Souls are the main currency you use for pretty much everything outside of leveling up your elves. Awakening antiques, making cakes, buying stuff at shops, and even watering that special plant. You can also buy fox coins from special fox NPCs, but I didn't bother with this. It's a cool concept that mimics the stock market, but I always had a ton of soul and didn't feel this side quest was necessary. Speaking of side quests, DragonLoop has a few, and they're mostly takes on the time loop mechanic. Like, be at this place before this event, which will then alter how the timeline goes, and then you'll get a reward like a new elf or an optional boss, or, if you're really lucky, a lily spore. Collect 4 of these, and you increase how much your lily heals you. That's it for progression. DragonLoop's progression system is packed with charm and experimentation. It ditches the traditional level grind in favor of something a little more creative in its bead system. It can get a little convoluted with the extra steps in its modification system, but once things click, you'll be weaving together a build that's all your own.
Exploration.
DragonLoop's exploration is kinda tough to explain. By this point in the review, you know the game revolves around a time loop mechanic. And if I show you this image of branching timelines, you'll probably piece it together. Especially if you're into visual novels. You weeb. This is the time map, and it's everything in DragonLoop. It shows you how time flows in the game, how your choices splinter into alternate paths, and how to get where you're going. Or at least, how to try. Here's how it works. C is trapped in a 5-day time loop. After 5 days, the world ends and you get booted back to day 1. But, and this is important, you don't lose progress. You keep all your beads, abilities, unlocked areas, and items. You can also revisit any moment you've previously mapped by opening the time map and clicking a node. Now, let's talk about time corridors. Those eerie blue rooms scattered across the map. They house the NPC that crafts your knots, the antique terminal, and the cake guy. But going through them comes with a cost. Every time corridor you pass advances time by 1 day. So, if you enter 5 of them in a single run, boom, the loop ends and you're sent back to day 1. So yeah, you've got 5 days to explore, and with a world this big, your first thought might be, there's no way I can see everything in that short a time. Enter the time map. Every time you pass through a time corridor, it creates a new node on the time map, a snapshot of that moment in the timeline. You can then revisit any of these nodes, hopping between timelines to try different paths, backtrack with new abilities to reach new time corridors, or avoid time corridors altogether to preserve your days. The end result is this puzzle-like meta layer of exploration. You'll compare the time map to your in-game world map, plot new routes, and experiment with diverging paths to find new routes and unlock new nodes. It's mentally engaging in a way I've never experienced in a Metroidvania before. And yeah, it can be tricky, but the game helps you out. Scattered throughout the world are dragon statues that mark important timeline branches on your time map. These act like built-in hint systems, nudging you in the right direction without feeling intrusive or breaking immersion. Okay, we good on the time loop stuff? Cool. Let's move on to my general thoughts on the game's exploration. Exploration is fantastic, as long as you dig the whole time loop aspect. DragonLoop's world is pretty dense with lots of things to find and do. Of course, there are a ton of beads to find, lily sprouts, bags that increase your max amount of souls and ichor you can carry, mini bosses to defeat and turn into elves to aid you in battle, and antiques to modify C. There are also a lot of NPCs you can find out and about who offer up minigames for you to complete for rewards. None of these minigames are important to the plot, but they can be fun and typically give you a cool antique for completing them, so they're worth doing at least once. All in all, DragonLoop's exploration is highly rewarding thanks to all the items to collect, all its hidden passages, and how you have to find new paths and unlock shortcuts just to move the game forward without resetting the timeline. And none of this could be possible without a good in-game map. When I originally played DragonLoop, the map was blocky yet serviceable with very little bells and whistles. But now, it looks completely different with detailed rooms and a time tracker that color codes where you traveled on which day in that loop. which is super helpful and something I wish I had during my first playthrough. You can also mark up the map, but I found the markings to be limiting and not very helpful. However, there's a way to unlock every secret item and point of interest on the map, and I always love when MVs do that. Options like this are crucial for people who want to 100% games. And what can I even say about fast travel? The time map is your fast travel, and accessing it requires you to be at a time corridor, which you can instantly teleport to from the pause screen. So yeah, the game has excellent fast travel. However, this was not the case in my original playthrough. If I wanted to use the time map a month ago, I had to go to a time corridor, talk to the NPC to get to the Soul Realm, restart the loop, and then use the time map at the beginning of the game. It was tedious and time consuming, so I'm thrilled to see you can now access the time map easier and quicker than ever. I knew sitting on this review was a good idea, because the old way of accessing the time map sucked. So, good job, devs. That's it for exploration. DragonLoop's map is more than just a map. It's a puzzle. The game asks you to think in the fourth dimension by wrapping traditional exploration in a mind-bending puzzle box of time where you chase progress across parallel realities and dead ends until the world finally unfolds. But the wildest part? It works. Between the time map, clever dragon statue hints, secret-laden world design, and smart quality of life updates, DragonLoop turns exploration into something truly memorable, and even a little bit magical.
Atmosphere, narrative.
DragonLoop's atmosphere is a little strange, but not in a bad way. The game's about stopping an apocalypse, but its art style and music are so dang bright and cheery. And C, Oro, and all the other NPCs are absolutely adorable. Even the enemies are more cute than imposing. And the particle effects and sound design feel very arcadey. Overall, I like the game's general look and feel. I guess my issue with the atmosphere is that I just didn't sense the impending doom. Most of the characters never mention it. There's no cutscenes or visual indicators showing some kind of extinction level event on the horizon, like an encroaching comet or giant celestial beast or something. And there's really no sense of conflict in the game. There's a clear objective and stakes, save the world in 5 days or be trapped in this loop forever, but the pressure is pretty light, which might make sense given you can just reset time whenever you want. I suppose the core of my issue is that there's just a lot of telling and not showing, and half of what was told to me in my original playthrough was in a language I didn't understand. Regardless, I was able to piece things together and understand what was going on, but I certainly would have liked to have seen things to better understand this world. I'll be vague to avoid spoilers, but there's this whole thing about a dragon and a turtle, and not once did I get to see anything related to the turtle. It's a shame the turtle, who plays a crucial role in the game's lore, never actually shows up in any meaningful way. Personally, I feel like the game's final stretch should have involved the turtle in some way. Now, I'm aware this is a common complaint I make on this channel, that I want to see and feel a game's conflict more. But I also understand a small team of 2 with limited resources made this game. And though I would have loved some extra cutscenes and visuals to drive home that I'm playing a game about a looming world-ending catastrophe resulting from a conflict between a dragon and a turtle, I get how that might be a lower priority for most people, especially considering that the final product we got was still pretty dang good, if not a little janky and quirky. I'll wrap up this section by touching on the game's multiple endings. Technically, every timeline that ends on the 5th day counts as an ending, but the one I want to talk about is the true ending. And let me tell you, it's phenomenal. It's right up there with Blasphemous in terms of how well it executes melding mechanics and narrative. Again, I'll keep things vague to avoid spoilers, but what makes DragonLoop's true ending path so special is how it brings every mechanic full circle. It's a brilliant final trial that demands mastery of your entire toolkit. Your abilities, your understanding of the world, your routing, your timeline knowledge. It doesn't just ask you to play well, it asks you to think well, to remember well, and to execute everything the game's taught you. I genuinely can't think of a better way to wrap up this kind of experience. Well, maybe involve the turtle somehow, but that's a narrative quibble. Mechanically, the path to DragonLoop's true ending is pitch perfect. That's it for this section. DragonLoop might look like a bright, bubbly side-scroller full of cuteness and charm, and it is, But beneath that cheery exterior is a story about the end of the world. While I wish the game showed that danger a little more through visuals or cutscenes, the vibes are still strong, even if the tone doesn't always match the stakes. But all that said, the game's final act sticks the landing in a big way. The true ending path is a brilliant, brainy payoff that ties all the mechanics together into one last, satisfying loop. It's not the most emotionally charged Metroidvania I've played, but it is one of the most conceptually clever.
Final thoughts and score.
DragonLoop is a strange little gem. Quirky, clever, and a bit rough around the edges. It throws out traditional RPG progression and wraps its world in a time-bending puzzle box where exploration and experimentation are the stars of the show. Combat's simple but satisfying. Traversal options are excellent, with nearly each ability having multiple uses and being unique to the genre. And the time map system might be one of the coolest takes on Metroidvania exploration I've ever seen, even if its UI could use some improvements. Sure, it's got issues. The translation and localization problems at launch were rough, with some issues persisting. The atmosphere doesn't match the apocalyptic stakes, and the narrative leans a little too hard on telling instead of showing. But here's the thing. It all still works very well. Once the mechanics click, DragonLoop becomes a rewarding and mind-bending experience that asks you not to just play well, but to think well. And by the time I reached the true ending, I was as satisfied as I was impressed. I award DragonLoop a 7.5 out of 10. As much as I love this game, the mistranslations hold it back a bit, even a month out from launch. But things have gotten so much better in under a month. Who knows? Maybe if I waited another month, I would have bumped the game up to an 8 or an 8.5. Regardless, this small team is working wonders and should be commended for working so hard on making the best version of their game. Anyway, DragonLoop is available on PC. It took me 23 hours to get the game's true ending, mainly because I kept getting lost. But the time map has been updated with symbols to help you out now, and that's pretty cool. I played the game entirely on my Steam Deck with 0 issues, and thus give the game a Steam Deck rating of verified.
Tier placement.
DragonLoop is creative, clever, and wildly experimental, with one of the most unique exploration systems I've seen in a Metroidvania. Even its progression system, with the beads and the knots, is super inventive and refreshingly different. It's not the cleanest game out there, there's some jank and the translation is still a bit iffy, but I'd be lying if I said it wasn't a great Metroidvania. DragonLoop opens up a new timeline in the A tier. DragonLoop is a hidden gem that keeps shining brighter with each patch. If you're thinking about jumping in, I say go for it. It's not perfect, but the mechanics are sound, the gameplay's fun, and the translation is now good enough to get you through. Just be warned, it is a time loop game with a ton of backtracking and a heavy emphasis on planning your routes. If you make your moves haphazardly, you'll hit dead ends and waste many frustrating hours running around and mentally exhausting yourself. But if you use the time map smartly and stay on top of your options, you'll save yourself precious time in the long run and have a great experience that doesn't drag on.